Hello, and welcome to The Rightest Leftist with Nathan Ogilvie, the podcast for the politically homeless. In this episode, we're going to be following up on the little mini-series on the housing crisis, and we're going to have a look at, in particular, one big factor that's leading to the housing crisis. And I want to show you this champion of Australian culture, this great businessman, Eddie Deline. I'm just going to get in position because this is going to be a long one. So Eddie Deline, if you don't know, is, I believe, 33 or 34 years old, and he owns 150 properties. Now, I just want to start from the outset to just let you know that I do consider myself a capitalist, and I'm not making an argument about taking away anyone's property or putting an upper limit on it. That's not what I'm about. But what I am about is recognizing that, in particular, for someone like this, 150 properties is part of the problem. It's what the Australian Tax Office considers mega landlords, and that's people who own 20 properties or more in their own name. Now, there's a whole other issue of businesses and conglomerations and corporations owning a lot of property. But I think this is just a philosophical question of, should one individual be allowed to own 150 properties? And also, but what I'm going to look at as well, whether you think it's a moral issue or not, and you might be totally fine to say, yeah, okay, he worked hard to earn the properties, but also there's some mechanisms that the government has in place to make it easier. And my whole argument, if you've seen any previous videos, is as long as there's a flaw and we don't have Australians living in poverty, even though a report just came out that there's 1 in 7 Australians living in poverty, there's a bit of an issue when you have these mega landlords who are owning 150 properties, and the way the government's set up and taxes and things like that, it makes it easier to buy more properties. I think I have no problem with people being owning an investment property. And as I've said, I'd even go up to 2. And then once you hit 3 and above, it should be financially less appealing to own more and more. Until such a time we can get the housing crisis fixed, then we can relook at it. But just in terms of renters, so if you are a renter looking at this and going, oh, maybe he's my landlord, because if he owns 150 properties, there's a really slight chance that you might live in one of his properties. This is the national median rent price. So it's basically, you get all of the properties together and their rental price, and you divide it by the amount of properties. And as you can see, it's through COVID. Look, 2020, there was a distinct shoot up of the average median rent price. And from under 500, about $560, let's say. And now it's shooting up over 600, and that's getting to 2025. It could be getting close to $700. And if you look there from 2006, it's over doubled the average price, the median rent price. But salaries haven't. And this is where, if you have never been a renter or you just don't care about renters, well, I do. And I think this is a big problem, because that price eats into their cost of living, and that's how people are falling into property. And the thing too is, this is not lazy people or people on Centrelink. This is just hardworking everyday Aussies who are renting. Maybe usually younger people, as we saw in the last video, or single parents or single people are often overrepresented in the renters. They're just not going to be able to get on the property market and buy a house if most of their income is going towards rent, and it's getting worse. Look, that line is not going down, it's going up. Now, I want to bring your attention to something, and this is how investors seem to do so well, property investors, is this idea of negative gearing. If you've never heard of it, I'm just going to give a really brief rundown of how it works. So let's say you got an investment property, and yearly the expenses are $40,000, and you can see a breakdown of the expenses there. So I always hear the argument from the property owners like, oh, it's not a walk in the park, we have a lot of expenses. That is very true. I'm a property owner, like I own my principal place of residence. I don't have an investment property, but I do understand that there's a lot of costs involved with a property. And then those expenses oftentimes can be greater than the income brought in from the rent. So in this example, it's $30,000. So then what happens is you have a disparity. So they call that a net rental loss. So if all the expenses of the property are higher than the income, that's a loss. And in this example, that's let's just say $10,000. So then what happens is what you can do, and this is what negative gearing is you can sort of write that loss off against your personal income. So let's say the income of that owner was $80,000, which means their tax bill, obviously there's a lot of factors. This is just broad numbers. The tax bill of around $16,000. Well, what they can do is subtract that net rental loss after the negative gearing, and then that brings down their taxable income to $70,000. So then their tax bill is around $13,000. So similar example, but just so you can understand how it happens, is this is Bob, pays $20,000 a year in interest on his investment property, but he only earns $10,000 a year renting it out. So the income being $85,000. So if he has a $10,000 loss, he can subtract that from his income taxes, personal income, and then will only pay tax on the $75,000. Now, why that is a problem is because this chart shows you what they call like the foregone revenue. So that tax money that people are writing off on their income is in a way public money, because that's people paying less on their taxes for owning a home. And then you look at it and you go, okay, but hang on, they're losing money. But you got to understand the property is going up in value and they are getting income from the property as well. And who's losing out really is the public, the people that should be getting that tax money from people's personal income. So they're using a loss on property to pay less tax on their income. And if you can look here, this is a projection, so it does include real numbers, but then it projects in the future with the negative gearing deductions. By the year 2035 to 36, we're going to be losing, and those are in millions, so that's $14.1 billion in revenue through taxes for the government for these people who own properties to essentially get richer and to increase their, and they use this to increase their property portfolio. And the article I'm linking, it talks about that, where even though rental values in some areas are going down or it's being less attractive to it, because of this negative gearing, a lot of property investors are still holding on to their properties. And it's the way mega landlords like Eddie Deline use these mechanisms to make themselves wealthier because of the tax incentives. And this really highlights it. And this is the whole point. You know, if we talk about economic inequality, you know, what my thing is about everyday Aussies who are struggling, those numbers there. So basically this is a chart of that tax revenue foregone. So meaning the government doesn't get that money to spend on services. The number 9 and 10. So if you're just listening and not watching, the top 10% of wealthiest Australians. So it's their income divided up. So if you got all of the population, they're divided up into 10%. You got the lowest income all the way up to the highest. The highest income people by far are the ones paying the least tax, and it's about 2.953 billion. So let's just say 3 billion, rounding it up to just about 3 billion. That's how much they're saving on taxes. And then the next percentage down, so the top 20% wealthiest, or the next one, it's 1.2 billion. So if you add that all up together, about the top 20% of Australians are paying $4.2 billion less in tax through this negative gearing. And it barely benefits the bottom 20%. It's only about just over 300 million, let's say 350 million foregone for the lowest income Aussies. And most Aussies in the middle, yeah, some are saving on that, but the numbers are really low. It just shoots up for the wealthiest Australians. And then what happens is because they're getting wealthier with their higher income, and then they have to pay less taxes. So this is where talking about people on the dole or unemployed taking money from the government directly. Well, also I know it's illegal. The argument is, well, it's legal, but we could change it. I know Albanese was too scared to change it, and it's a big controversial issue. The wealthiest Australians and property investors have a lot of political power, and they don't want to give up this. But what we can see is it's just the rich getting richer, really. The investor market. So I do want to acknowledge too, because everyone says, oh, it's the mum and dad or the people who've worked their whole lives to buy an investment property. And that's true individually. And you can see here in this chart, and I'll read it out for the listeners, it's about 70% of the investor market of individuals only own one investment property. And then if you add people that own two, it's about, I'd say it looks like 90% of the individuals. So you can see there, the caveat is it doesn't include companies or trusts. So definitely it's a little skewed. So the people that own three or more on this chart, it's about, let's say, 10 to 15%. It's definitely higher than that because of people who own property through trusts and companies and things like that. But really what I'm saying is, what I would say is the policy is the negative gearing for one or two properties is fine, but I think we need to take those incentives away once you hit three or more properties. And that's for businesses and trusts as well, because it makes it, as you add your properties, it gets easier and easier with negative gearing. It should get to a point where it gets harder and harder. So we're not taking away the properties, but what we're doing is making it less financially appealing to become a mega landlord. And again, you can build your wealth through one or two investment properties, but we need to free up that, because both Albanese and Peter Dutton, so Labor and Liberal Party, both in the last election acknowledged that the problem was supply. Their solution was to build more houses, which I do agree with. And I'm hoping to have an expert on who's in the housing, in the building industry, that we can talk about the problems with that. But a big problem with the supply is the houses that are already built are a lot of the time disproportionately owned by these mega landlords. And the numbers there are, add that one on. So it's about 2,500 investors in Australia have a stake in 10 or more rentals. And the analysts, the experts on that say it's because of negative gearing makes it easier to build a large portfolio of properties. And yeah, again, this was before the election, but because it's a sticky issue that people don't, I think most everyday Aussies probably don't even understand it, especially if you're not a homeowner. Why would you need to understand it? But I think we need to educate more people about this is causing the housing crisis in a big way. Let's go back to our mate Eddie Deline, Aussie champion who owns 150 properties. Good on him. His response to all this is, I'll read his words. That's just the rules of our society and government and of how Australia works and even other countries, like it's capitalism in that regard. Okay, so I half agree with that capitalism, yes, people should be, the profit motive is there and people should be able to purchase and invest in property. But it's just when the rules are rigged in the favor of the wealthy and the rich to make them even richer, that's when capitalism starts spiraling out of control. And when you have 1 in 7 Australians living in poverty, I just don't think that I can't live day to day knowing that we have so many Australians, everyday Aussies, struggling. And it's not even just people in poverty anymore. A lot of people that I know who have saved a lot, they work, they have full-time jobs, can't get into the property market. And it's just upside down. And we really just need to keep talking about it and work on practical solutions to solve this problem. And one of them is, I'm sorry, Eddie, but we need to make it harder for people that are mega landlords or want to become mega landlords and own so many properties. It needs to be financially harder for them to do it than just being able to use these things like negative gearing. So I don't know what Eddie would say in response to that, but I would love to have him on if he ever comes across this video. But I would also like to just end this on thinking about the kind of Australia that we want to be. Because for me, that trend line of property ownership going down and being more and more concentrated in the hands of a few people, it is, capitalism out of control. And it makes me think of the game Monopoly. If anyone, do I need to really open up the picture? I'll just bring it up now. Everyone remember this game? Anyone? Monopoly was actually created because it was a critique of capitalism. And the idea was that it shows you what happens when someone just keeps owning more and more properties and is charging rent to people. And as the game goes on, you realize that it gets more and more unfair, and the person with the most property ultimately wins. And the sort of the trick of that game is that it's luck, literally the roll of the dice. And like in real life, being born into a family that already owns property, or a wealthy family, or just by getting lucky with certain circumstances, when the game's over, everyone puts the pieces back and you get to start again. You don't have to live fully in debt in the game, but it doesn't feel good if you play it and lose. And I don't want the real world to be like a Monopoly game. That's what is happening. And I think what we need to really think about, and if we want to avoid that in Australia, where we don't want to turn into a country where only really few people own property and everyone else is renting and struggling, because unfortunately that's where we're heading if some of these changes don't happen. So I'm going to continue this series and continue talking about all the other issues in Australia, and I hope you continue with me on that journey. My name's Nathan Ogilvie. This is The Rightest Leftist, the podcast for the politically homeless, and let's talk again very soon.